Frank Thompson had worked at the Burlington Transit Station in Vermont for 23 years. At 62, with retirement approaching, he knew every corner of the station, every regular passenger, and every sign that something was out of place. But on this cold October night, something unusual caught his attention. The last train had departed at 11:45 p.m., leaving the station eerily quiet. Frank made his usual rounds, checking the ticket office and ensuring the waiting areas were empty. That's when he heard a soft whimper from Platform 3. "Hello," Frank called out, shining his flashlight into the darkness. Another whimper, followed by the sound of claws clicking against the concrete. As Frank approached, the light revealed a medium-sized German Shepherd mix sitting beside a large brown leather suitcase. The dog looked thin but well-groomed, its dark eyes watching Frank intently. "Hey there, buddy," Frank said softly, stepping forward. The dog didn't growl or move aggressively, but it also didn't let Frank get too close to the suitcase. Instead, it shifted slightly, placing itself between him and the bag. Frank had seen plenty of lost items in his years, wallets, phones, even a baby stroller once. But something about this felt different. The dog had no collar, yet it looked cared for. And the suitcase, real leather with brass fixtures, looked expensive. Following protocol, Frank radioed his supervisor, Sarah Martinez. "Sarah, I've got something strange on Platform 3. Better come take a look." 15 minutes later, Sarah arrived. At 45, she had managed station security for 10 years, but even she looked puzzled when she saw the scene. "Have you checked the security footage?" she asked, keeping her distance from the dog. "Not yet," Frank replied. "Wanted you to see this first." They walked back to the security office, where Sarah pulled up the station cameras. The footage showed that at 9:17 p.m., a well-dressed man in his 30s had hurried onto Platform 3, the dog trotting beside him. The man set down the suitcase, knelt to embrace the dog, then quickly walked away. The dog sat next to the suitcase and hadn't moved since. "Should we call the police?" Frank asked. Sarah rewound the footage. "No signs of anything suspicious in the way he handled the bag," she said. "But with today's security concerns, we should be careful." She picked up the phone and called Officer Mike Chun, who arrived 20 minutes later with his K-9 partner. Max sniffed around the suitcase, showing no signs of explosives or drugs. "Whatever's in there isn't dangerous," Officer Chun concluded. "But this dog, he's guarding it like it's the most important thing in the world." The real problem was getting to the suitcase. Every time someone tried to approach, the dog would shift, blocking access. It wasn't aggressive, but it was determined. "I've never seen anything like this," Officer Chun admitted. "This isn't a trained security dog. But it's acting with a purpose." Linda Morrison, a local veterinarian, arrived next. Sarah had called her for advice about the dog. "Let me try something," Linda said, offering the dog some treats. The dog accepted them politely but didn't budge from its post. Even when given water, it only took quick sips before resuming its watchful position. By 2 a.m., a small group had gathered: Frank, Sarah, Officer Chun, Linda, and 2 other night shift workers. The dog hadn't moved except to occasionally circle the suitcase as if checking to make sure it was still there. "We can't leave things like this," Sarah said finally. "The morning rush starts in 4 hours." Linda crouched a few feet away, observing. "This isn't a stray," she said. "Look at how focused it is. This dog is protecting something important." Frank, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. "What if we don't separate them? The dog's not dangerous. There's an empty storage room next to my office. We could move both the suitcase and the dog there while we figure this out." A discussion followed about regulations, but practicality won. Carefully, they used a luggage cart to move the suitcase, the dog following closely, never letting it out of sight. Once inside the storage room, the dog settled back next to the suitcase, its watchful eyes never leaving it. Frank, watching through the window, felt a strange tug in his heart. The dog's loyalty, the mystery of what was inside the suitcase, it all felt important. He leaned against the doorframe and spoke softly. "Don't worry, buddy. We'll figure this out." The dog's ears perked up at his voice. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and in that look, Frank felt something deeper, a story waiting to be told, one that would change everything. By morning, word had spread through Burlington. Local news reporter Jenny Walsh arrived just as Frank was ending his shift, her camera crew in tow. "Mr. Thompson," she called, hurrying after him. "Is it true that a dog has been guarding an abandoned suitcase all night?" Frank sighed. "Yes, but we're handling it." He gestured toward Sarah Martinez, who was better suited for media inquiries. The dog, now nicknamed Guardian by the staff, remained unfazed by the growing attention. Linda Morrison had returned early that morning with food and water, all of which the dog accepted without leaving its post. "The dog is healthy but tired," Linda reported. "No microchip. Judging by his coat and behavior, he's been cared for recently." Meanwhile, Officer Chun had been busy reviewing security footage. "Got something," he announced, pulling up a clip from 3 days earlier. The same man who had left the suitcase appeared in the footage, this time arriving at the station with the dog and the bag. He had bought a ticket but never boarded any train. He was testing something, Sarah realized. Maybe seeing if the dog would stay. The station's policy required unclaimed items to be opened after 24 hours, but this situation was unique. The suitcase itself offered few clues, expensive, unmarked, and sealed with a small brass key lock. Around noon, an unexpected visitor arrived. Margaret Wilson, an elderly woman who volunteered at the local animal shelter. "I know that dog," she told Frank. "He used to come to the shelter with his owner, James, to help socialize nervous dogs. They stopped coming about 2 months ago." With this new lead, Officer Chun quickly tracked down James Mitchell, a 34-year-old software developer who had indeed owned a German Shepherd mix named Duke. But when the police visited his apartment, it was empty. Neighbors said he had moved out weeks ago. The plot thickens, Jenny Walsh reported live from the station. The loyal dog, now identified as Duke, continues his vigil over a mysterious suitcase, while questions about his owner's disappearance grow. The story touched hearts. By mid-afternoon, locals arrived with blankets, treats, and toys for Duke. He accepted them politely but never wavered from his mission. Frank, watching quietly, noticed something others hadn't. Every few hours, Duke followed the same routine, circling the suitcase 3 times, pressing his nose to each corner, then whining softly. "He's checking something," Frank mentioned to Linda. "Like he's making sure whatever's inside is okay." Linda watched carefully. "This isn't just about guarding," she agreed. "He's worried about what's in there." As night approached, Sarah called a meeting. "We need to decide whether to open that suitcase," she said. "The media attention is increasing, and we can't keep the station blocked off forever." The discussion was intense. Some wanted immediate action, citing security concerns. Others, including Frank and Linda, argued for patience, worried about Duke's reaction. The decision was unexpectedly made for them. Around 8 p.m., Duke's behavior changed. He started pacing, whining, and looking anxiously toward the station entrance. Then, for the first time since he arrived, he began barking urgently. "Something's wrong," Frank said, moving closer to the storage room. Duke's barks turned into frantic whines. Whatever was in that suitcase, Duke thought it needed help, immediately. Sarah made the call. "Get the locksmith here. We're opening it now." The station had quieted for the evening, creating a tense atmosphere as the small group gathered around the suitcase. The locksmith worked carefully, while Duke watched intently, no longer trying to stop them. With a final click, the lock opened. Frank, who had earned Duke's trust, lifted the lid. Inside, carefully packed and connected to a small medical device, was an incubator containing 7 tiny puppies, no more than a few days old. The room fell silent as the reality of Duke's vigil sank in. "He wasn't just guarding the suitcase," Frank murmured. "He was protecting his family." The discovery of the puppies set off a whirlwind of activity. Linda immediately took charge, checking the tiny newborns inside the incubator. "This is amazing," she murmured. "It's a modified medical incubator, rigged to maintain perfect temperature and humidity. These puppies are no more than 5 days old." Duke's tense posture melted into gentle concern. He sniffed each puppy, licking them softly before settling next to the incubator, watching Linda work. Officer Chun quickly ran a background check on James Mitchell. "He was admitted to Burlington Medical Center 3 days ago," he reported. "Emergency appendectomy. He's been in recovery with complications." Everything made sense now. James had been taking care of these puppies alone after their mother died. When he realized he needed emergency surgery, he had no choice but to create this setup and trust Duke to protect them. James must have known he couldn't take them to the hospital, Sarah said. But he also knew Duke wouldn't leave them. Frank watched Duke, impressed by his unwavering devotion. He kept his promise. The puppies were moved to a safer location in the station, with volunteers stepping up to help feed them. Linda arranged for extra supplies from her clinic, and soon, the station's storage room became an impromptu nursery. Meanwhile, James had finally regained access to his phone and saw the news reports. A nurse arrived at the station around 2 a.m. James has been asking about his dogs non-stop, she said. He's still weak but desperate to know they're okay. Sarah arranged a video call, and the moment James's face appeared on the screen, Duke's ears perked up. He rushed to the phone, tail wagging for the first time in days. "Duke, buddy," James whispered, clearly emotional. "You did it. You kept them safe." He listened as Linda gave an update on the puppies. She reassured him that they were healthy, thanks to his clever incubator and Duke's dedication. Jenny Walsh, who had been covering the story, broadcasted the update live, capturing the emotional reunion. The community had already rallied behind Duke's story, and now they were invested in helping James, too. By morning, local businesses and shelters had donated supplies, and volunteers had signed up for round-the-clock puppy care. Frank, who had been quietly observing, felt something stir in his heart. He had spent years ensuring people made it safely to their destinations, but this felt different. "You're something special, aren't you?" he murmured to Duke, scratching the dog's ears. Duke leaned into the touch, but quickly returned to his station beside the puppies. "You're not done yet, huh?" Frank chuckled. "All right, we'll see this through." The community, touched by Duke's loyalty, had transformed the station into a place of warmth and compassion. What had started as a mystery was now a story of devotion, love, and the extraordinary lengths one dog had gone to in order to keep a promise. As the puppies grew stronger, their care routine became more structured. Volunteers took shifts, ensuring they were fed and kept warm. Duke remained their unwavering protector, checking on them after every feeding, cleaning them with gentle licks, and staying close. Linda marveled at his instincts. "He's not just guarding them, he's teaching us how to care for them." Meanwhile, James was finally well enough to leave the hospital. His first request was to see Duke and the puppies. Sarah arranged a private visit before the station opened for the morning rush. When James walked into the station, Duke's reaction was pure joy. He rushed to his owner, pressing against him and licking his hands. James knelt down, wrapping his arms around the dog, tears in his eyes. "You did it, Duke," he whispered. "You saved them." James examined each puppy, overwhelmed by how much they had grown. Linda handed him a notebook filled with detailed care logs. "We followed your instructions," she said. "Duke made sure we got everything right." The reunion was captured by Jenny Walsh's news crew, and the heartwarming footage quickly spread online. Donations poured in for local animal shelters, inspired by Duke's dedication. A few days later, Sarah called a meeting. "The puppies are old enough to start finding homes," she announced. "But we need to make sure they go to the right families." A community adoption event was planned at the station, drawing families from all over. Each puppy was matched with a loving home, and James personally met each adopter, making sure they understood the responsibility. As the adoption event wrapped up, Frank sat quietly, watching the last puppy play at his feet. She was the smallest of the litter, quiet and observant. He had grown attached to her over the weeks. "You know," Frank mused to James, "I was planning to retire soon. My house feels empty these days." James smiled, already guessing where this was going. "Sounds like she found the right home." Frank reached down and scooped up the little pup. "I think so, too." As the weeks passed, the Burlington Transit Station became more than just a place for travel. Inspired by Duke's story, the station implemented an official pet-friendly policy and partnered with local shelters to provide temporary housing for animals in crisis. A commemorative plaque was installed in the waiting area, honoring Duke's incredible loyalty. Duke, of course, remained by James's side, but he was more than just a pet now, he was a legend. Commuters stopped to greet him, and children pointed excitedly whenever they saw him patrolling the station. Frank, now retired, visited often with his new companion, whom he named Grace. She had inherited her father's calm nature and watchful eyes, and together they kept a quiet vigil over the place where Duke's journey had begun. One evening, as Frank and James sat on a bench watching Duke play with Grace, Frank chuckled. "You know, I thought I'd seen everything in my years at this station. But this was something special." James nodded, looking at Duke with deep gratitude.
Yeah.
It turns out, sometimes the greatest acts of love come from the most unexpected places. As the sun set over the station, Duke lay beside his family, his mission complete. He had protected his owner's greatest treasure and, in doing so, brought an entire community together. His promise had been fulfilled, but his legacy would last forever.